We're living in this moment of just unmatched scale. We have infrastructure that spans continents, right? Deep sea cables carrying what feels like a digital consciousness. And it feels absolute, total, and, well, permanent. It feels like we are way too big to fail, and certainly too big to be forgotten. So here is the profound question at the heart of this deep dive. How will historians, say 150,000 years from now, actually interpret us?
Well, the common assumption is what the sources call the hubris of scale. We all just assume our sheer size, our complexity, that it guarantees remembrance. The research we're getting into today, it completely flips that on its head. It argues that we systematically misunderstand the past and we will be systematically forgotten, all because of geological erasure over deep time.
And that's the core of it, isn't it? We're exploring the harsh science of, well, nothingness.
Yeah.
It shows why we look at these early advanced civilizations and just conclude they were simple, merely because so little of them remains. And we'll show why our own future remains are going to be just as misleading.
What's really fascinating here is the absolute necessity of adopting what's called archaeological humility. You have to think of it this way. The absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Once you stretch beyond, say, 10,000 years, the absence of evidence is simply evidence of geological erasure. We're only ever studying what the Earth allowed to survive. And the materials that survive, they're almost never the ones that define real technological advancement.
Okay, let's unpack this. Our mission today is to explore what actually survives the long march of time, why the ocean floor is the true hidden repository of early history, and ultimately what intellectual and cultural changes we need to make now to break humanity's cycle of collapse and maybe, finally, build a durable civilization. We suffer from a terrible historical blind spot. I mean, when we look at civilizations from the deep past, tens of thousands of years ago, and we find only scattered small fragments, we just automatically conclude they were small, primitive societies. But that only happens because we assume we're large today, since our stuff feels so large to us.
That's the error right there. You're applying our ephemeral, modern timescale to the geological timescale. And both of those assumptions completely fail when you look at the evidence of deep time. If you project forward, 10,000, 50,000, 150,000 years, none of our complexity survives. Our vast concrete cities, our networked infrastructure, our intricate machines, they're all metabolized back into the Earth by weathering, by oxidation, biological processes. They don't just crumble, they literally vanish.
So what will remain? I mean, if you're an archaeologist 150 millennia from now, what's in the sediment layer that defines the human age?
It's profoundly limited. The most enduring things will be chemical signatures, not physical structures. Future geologists will find these anomalous sediment layers just rich in microplastics, a pervasive global chemical signal that we existed. They'll find some isolated chemically stripped stone foundations, maybe some deep scars from mining operations, and perhaps most tellingly, a global ash horizon left by all our industrial combustion.
Wait, I want to linger on that for a second. The ash horizon. You're talking about a thin global layer of soot and particulates.
Exactly. It's the carbon black, the sulfates, the specific metal particulates released by every furnace, every engine, every power plant for the last 200 years. It's a chemically distinct fingerprint. It's a global signature of an entity that just burned things at a massive scale.
And from those few remains, microplastics, mining scars, an ash layer, the finding for a future intelligence would be, well, devastatingly simplistic. An advanced tool-using species briefly modified the planetary surface, had a huge environmental impact, and then disappeared. Social complexity and technological sophistication cannot be inferred. We just become a short-lived anomaly.
It's humbling, isn't it? We focus so much on the things that will survive, the huge buildings, the steel. But the paradox of durability is that the materials we consider advanced are often the ones that degrade the fastest.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Think about metal. We classify history by metal, right? Bronze Age, Iron Age. But metal is structurally fragile on a long time scale.
It is shockingly fragile. Iron returns quickly to iron oxide rust, and it becomes indistinguishable from common iron ore deposits. Aluminum oxidizes rapidly. Even our sophisticated stainless steel degrades into microparticulates within 50,000 years, especially in harsh environments. So the absence of metal says precisely nothing about the level of metallurgy a civilization achieved. You'd need, perfectly sealed anaerobic conditions to preserve anything beyond gold, platinum, and silver.
So if all the sophisticated stuff vanishes, what is left? Stone. We're talking granite countertops, stone bridges, marble statues, the very materials we associate with Neolithic or pre-industrial cultures.
And that's where our inevitable future bias comes from. Stone survives because it resists chemical decay, it withstands heat and pressure. It integrates neatly into geological strata. It survives because it's durable, not because it was primitive. So future archaeologists, finding our massive stone bridges and the polished remnants of our kitchen granite, will conclude we were a stone-using society with limited fleeting metallurgy. It's the exact same historical error we make today when we equate the presence of stone with low technological capacity. The problem gets even tougher because, look, even if we had indestructible materials, we still suffer from this fallacy of electrical exceptionalism.
Right.
We just assume that advanced technology must look like what we see now: wires, engines, semiconductors.
Right. But the reality is that the defining elements of our complexity, high-speed computing, fiber optics, digital communications, they leave virtually zero trace in deep time. Your phone defines this era, but it is chemically designed to vanish in just a couple of decades. The information leaves no physical artifact.
So if previous cycles of advanced civilization developed along, say, non-electrical or non-industrial paths, they would be archaeologically invisible by definition. We wouldn't find wires or engines because they never used them in the first place.
That opens the door to interpreting past primitive accounts entirely differently, doesn't it? Like, take acoustics or resonance. We look at that and think of simple drums.
But imagine controlled vibration, using sound energy the way we use electrical energy. Resonance can be used to cut materials, to move massive stones, or to shatter structures. The devices that create this resonance, though, they're probably made of wood or fiber or highly resonant non-metallic materials, all of which disintegrate entirely.
Okay, but isn't that romanticizing it a little? How do we distinguish a genuine degraded memory of complex tech from just a simple metaphor or a myth?
And that's the core challenge of archaeological humility. We can't prove it was a technology, but we have to acknowledge the data point. When material culture vanishes, the only thing left is narrative culture, story. The knowledge of resonant engineering survives only in myth, songs that moved mountains, or the legend of Joshua's trumpets collapsing the walls of Jericho. We label them metaphors because we lack the industrial artifacts to prove otherwise, but they could be highly accurate, albeit distorted, memories of how things worked.
And what about advanced materials we have today, like technical ceramics? We just think of ceramics as common pottery.
Yet, modern ceramics like ceramic capacitors or ultra-hard composite blades, high-tolerance bearings, they show that material science allows for heat resistance and precision that far surpasses most metals. After thousands of years, those advanced industrial ceramics are functionally indistinguishable from common pottery fragments in a dig site. The complexity just vanishes, leaving only the material residue.
And the same would apply to things like frequency manipulation, maybe harnessing piezoelectric properties in certain stones, or drawing on atmospheric electrical potential.
Precisely. They leave no stable fossilizing artifact. Yet, mythology across the globe is filled with these corresponding descriptions: rods of power, thunder weapons, or voices of the gods. These are narratives of function, but they've been distorted over time into the language of the sacred.
So this new lens, it forces us to fundamentally reinterpret some of the massive mystery structures that define our history. If we just shed the industrial bias, the ambiguity dissolves.
For example, the pyramids. They stop being merely oversized tombs, which they rarely were in practice anyway, and they become geometric acoustic resonators devices designed to harness and focus environmental energy. Similarly, structures like Sacsayhuaman in Peru, with its impossible polygonal fitting stones, they stop being the result of brute force, and they become optimized seismic-resistant architecture. The complexity wasn't mystical or primitive. It was simply non-industrial and, crucially, non-fossilizing.
Okay, we've established that time, decay, and environmental processes erase almost all material culture on dry land. But what really stands out here is a massive geographical blind spot. The idea that 90% of the archaeological record of complex early humans is now underwater. This isn't theoretical, it's a geometric certainty.
This is the Great Erasure. To understand it, you had to visualize the planet during the last glacial maximum. Global sea levels were approximately 400 feet, or 120 meters, lower than they are today. And where do humans always centralize their greatest efforts? Near water. Major river deltas, rich estuaries, protected harbors, all those prime locations were dry land.
So as the ice sheets melted over thousands of years, all those early centers of civilization, the vast majority of human habitation during that deep time cognitive era, were just slowly consumed by the rising ocean.
And that rise wasn't gradual, like a bathtub filling up over millennia. The sources emphasize it came in violent, catastrophic pulses. Think about meltwater pulse 1A, which saw the sea level jump by 40 to 60 feet in only 200 to 500 years. That triggers mass global coastal drowning, massive tsunamis, and continental shelf scouring.
These were obliterating events. They caused mega-tsunamis, waves that were maybe 10 times higher and 50 times more massive than the 2004 Indian Ocean event, capable of scrubbing every piece of non-stone infrastructure clean off the continental shelf and just leaving nothing but silt.
And we treat the submerged architecture we find today as strange anomalies, don't we? Submerged structures like that mysterious platform at Yonaguni in Japan or the grid pattern foundations found in the Gulf of Cambay off India, and the vast sunken land bridge, Doggerland, between Britain and Europe. These aren't exceptions. They're the few isolated survivors of the older global coastline, preserved just by chance or unusually stable foundations.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the entire Earth system enters a kind of reset mode. The removal of the immense weight of those ice sheets triggers a process known as isostasy tectonic shifting, increased volcanism, fault line activation. The planet itself is metabolizing past structures.
And that's why narrative culture becomes the essential fossil. Where material culture is erased, the story survives. The fact that flood myths dominate world mythologies, Sumerian, Hopi, Greek, Hindu, indigenous traditions globally, that is not a coincidence. It's data. It's the collective narrative preservation of memory related to a catastrophic, world-changing geological event.
So what does this terrifying cycle mean for us right now? We are currently entering the same destabilizing conditions that triggered the last great erasure: infrastructure instability, rapidly emerging mass nomadism from resource stress, increased seismic and volcanic activity globally.
Civilizations collapse because they are fundamentally rigid systems. You can think of them as rigid tensegrity systems, like a highly complex house of cards held together by tension dependencies, centralized control, energy-intensive supply chains, shared vulnerability. Collapse is not an accident. It is the predictable mathematical consequence of overstructured complexity when you apply stress. You remove one critical dependency, and the whole system just fails simultaneously.
So if we are going to achieve a permanent civilization, one that adapts instead of breaks, the research lays out 4 non-negotiable invariants. The first one is redundancy over centralization. We have to eliminate the single point of failure.
That means many small energy systems, micro-production hubs, decentralized communication. Think of how the internet works. You can bomb any single server farm, and the network just routes around it. We need physical infrastructure built with that same decentralized, resilient architecture.
The second invariant is low energy debt. We need to shift from an industrial metabolism, which is always debt-based because it consumes faster than the planet can regenerate, to an ecological one.
That is the ultimate sustainability challenge. Regenerative design. Our systems must generate more resources and energy than they consume over the long term. This means radical efficiency and closing resource loops entirely, making sure every input is sourced renewably and every output is a regenerative input for something else.
Third, we need an adaptive mythos. And this requires a monumental cultural shift, promoting humility and cyclical awareness, the understanding that things naturally peak and decline over the delusion of linear, endless growth and progress.
An adaptive mythos means telling the truth about limits and accepting that our current form is temporary. It means valuing long-term confidence and responsibility over short-term consumption and novelty. We have to learn to embrace the reality of cycles rather than fighting them.
And finally, the fourth invariant, dynamic equilibrium. What does that look like in practice? We're not going back to being pure hunter-gatherers, but how do we reintroduce mobility and a rotational land use to prevent this dependence on fixed, brittle infrastructure?
It means building infrastructure that is designed to be disassembled, moved, or rebuilt. It means rotational farming that gives land back to nature periodically. It's about not allowing our physical footprint to become so deep and rigid that when the environment changes, and it always does, we are instantly trapped and helpless. Think less permanent concrete and more highly adaptable modular architecture.
This is a massive shift. Those changes sound necessary, but incredibly difficult to implement globally. What's the single ultimate roadblock here? It's not climate change, that's a symptom. It's not war, that's a temporary state.
Yeah.
It's something far more subtle.
This raises a really important question. What is the largest barrier to breaking this cycle of rigidity and collapse? It is convenience. The deep psychological addiction to comfort without responsibility. Convenience systematically eradicates adaptability, resilience, and essential manual skills.
You're saying convenience transforms us from active participants in an ecosystem into something else.
Into what the sources call zoo animals. We are fed, we're protected, kept comfortable, But we lose the competence required to survive outside the carefully controlled, centralized enclosure. And when that highly complex zoo, the centralized infrastructure collapses, the conveniently incompetent die first.
So a permanent civilization must actually re-embed inconvenience.
Yes. Yes. It must re-embed manual skills, ecological literacy, and competence as the scaffolding for its society. Competence, the ability to do things for yourself and your community without relying on a brittle, centralized supply chain, is the only true form of long-term security.
To summarize this whole deep dive, then, deep time erases almost everything. The most complex technologies vanish utterly, leaving behind only the durability of stone and the persistence of story. Our technological complexity will vanish as completely as every prior one, and future geologists will judge us based primarily on our global layer of microplastics and the occasional granite foundation.
And if breaking this fractal cycle of human civilization requires shifting from centralized, energy-intensive convenience to distributed, inconvenience-based competence, then the primary challenge is not the discovery of some new revolutionary technology. The challenge is deciding which current luxuries and systems of comfort we are willing to sacrifice now to ensure our descendants survive the next great geological erasure. That psychological rewrite, that is what will determine if we truly become a permanent civilization.